Well, we're in this fourth part of the series, Beyond, and it's all anchored to something that Jesus said, that Jesus came so that we could experience life, but not any ordinary life. No, it's so much better than that. That we can experience life to the full, or abundant life, or life to the excess, or life beyond. And John, in his gospel, the story of Jesus, he captures 7 I am statements that help build the framework in which, well, if we live within, we can experience this type of life. And in fact, these 7 I am statements would have gotten every Jewish listener's attention. Why? Because I am is the name, the most sacred, most holy name for God himself. In fact, it was God in a burning bush to Moses where God reveals this holy, sacred name. And Jesus emphatically says, I am, which everyone would understand that he was claiming to be God himself. In part 1, we looked at the first of these I am statements, and Jesus said, I am the bread. And then he gives this action. Remember, these actions all link together, in which if we live out these actions, right, we can experience this life beyond. Because I am the bread. If you come to me, you'll never grow hungry. If you believe in me, you'll never thirst again. Jesus was highlighting that there's a craving at the soul level, that this world is going to try to convince you to fill that craving with, but it will never go away. The only way it goes away is, well, through him. In part 2, we looked at another one of those I am statements, where Jesus says, I am the light. He was highlighting the fact that we live in this dark world, but the action that he calls us to is that if we follow him, if we stay one small step behind him, his light illuminates the darkness around us. And then in part 3, Jesus said, I am the gate. I'm the gate. And the sheep listen to his voice. Are you listening to his voice? I shared with all of you this picture of an ancient sheep pen. It would look something like this some 2,000 years ago. A stacked stone with one entrance. It was very common for the shepherd to lay his body in front of the entrance as the gate, as the door. And Jesus said, the only way to God the Father is through me. I am the one and only gate. Are you listening to my voice? And right as he was transitioning out of that teaching, he immediately went into another one of these I am statements. So he just said, I am the gate. And then all of a sudden he goes, but I am the shepherd as well. You see, sheep for the Jewish people in that part of the world were everything. It was at the center of, well, their entire kind of economic engines. Sheep were so important to their life, to their culture. Kind of think about it in our modern day, when we think about food, it's chicken or cows, or in this part of Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania, it's venison, it's deer, right? We just understand, it's really at the center of our culture. But for the Jewish people some 2,000 years ago, sheep were everything. They used sheep for food, for meat, and for milk. They used a ram's horn, not only to play music, it's called a shofar, but they also used ram's horns to hold olive oil. They use the skin for tent-like structures, and sometimes for clothing. They would use the wool for textiles, for clothing and linens, and they would also use it to trade with other countries. The wool was the biggest part of the economic engine tied to sheep, and they would use sheep for sacrifice. In fact, in the Talmud, rabbis wrote about the importance of sheep. This is what was written, what's written. Sell the field to buy the sheep, but do not sell the sheep to buy a field. They're just like, hey, land's important, but more important than land are the sheep. Don't get rid of the sheep. It was that critical. In fact, one of the most famous of all the Psalms is Psalm 23, where David, who when God first tapped him on the shoulder, was a young boy as a shepherd, but now he's king. And David writes that the Lord is my shepherd. The emphasis is on my. David recognized that God was his shepherd. as we see the storyline in the Bible all point to Jesus. You see God meticulously scripting this shepherd analogy. I mean, we go back to almost the beginning. One of Adam and Eve's sons, his name was Abel. You know what Abel was? Well, he's the first shepherd, at least the first recorded shepherd. One day he was bringing the fattest portion of his sheep as an offering to God, but his brother Cain just brought some. Cain was a farmer. He just brought some of the produce, not the best portion. Abel brought his best. Cain got really jealous and murdered, killed Abel. We think about three of the foundational people, all pointing to Jesus: Abraham and Moses and David. All of them were shepherds, all of them. And God formed a covenant with all three of them. A covenant, a special relationship where God says, I'm going to bring this to the relationship. I'm asking you to bring this to the relationship. In fact, it was Jesus that said, there's a new covenant. And it was Abraham who longed to have a child. And he and his wife Sarah waited and waited. And finally, God blessed them with a son named Isaac. And one day, God shows up to Abraham and says, hey, Abraham, I want you to kill your son. Yes, your son that you waited for. Yes, your son that you longed for. Yes, the son that you wanted. I want you to walk with him up a mountain and sacrifice him. And Abraham, with the heaviest of hearts, obeyed, trusted God, and started to walk up that mountain with his son. And at the very last moment, God provided the sheep as the sacrifice, as an act of worship, and spared Isaac. You see, we have to understand that God was weaving this amazing storyline through this idea of sheep, shepherds, that all pointed to Jesus. So Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. Now that word good is something that we can't ignore, because Jesus is going to separate himself from the other shepherds. He's like, yeah, I'm a shepherd. You know what a shepherd is, but I'm a different shepherd. I'm a good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And this would cause all the audience to kind of go, well, not really. Because shepherds, they wouldn't have given up their life for a sheep. Like, they would just say, I'll live to fight another day. I mean, a shepherd would fight for their sheep, but if it was like between their life and the sheep's life, like, they would be like, take the sheep. I'll find more. I mean, they were important. But again, the shepherd wouldn't just get, but Jesus said, but I'm the good shepherd. And immediately he starts to make this separation. He goes, but I lay down my life for the sheep. He highlights this difference. He goes, the hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. If you own a business, you understand this. I mean, you want to hire passionate, committed employees, right? You want that. But at the end of the day, it's not their business. No one cares more for the business than you, the business owner. No one is more passionate for the business than you are. Again, you want committed, passionate employees. But at the end of the day, your passion, your commitment, no one's going to surpass that because it's your business. And Jesus is just highlighting the fact that he's like, hey, hired hands, they don't care like I care. So when he sees the wolf coming, meaning the hired hand, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs. Well, he runs away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. It's just a job. It's just a check mark. But Jesus is like, but I'm the good shepherd. And I'm different. I'm different than other shepherds, and I'm definitely different than the hired hand. He reiterates, I'm the good shepherd. And then he reveals what really makes him different. He goes, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Now that word know, we got to pause there. Because on the surface level, we can look at that word know, and we start to think of, well, okay, you know my name, you know my age, my birthday, you know where I grew up, where I was raised, you know my siblings, you know my parents, right? It's kind of like you go to Wikipedia to know about someone, right? You read that list of facts, you read that list of insights. It's a collection of knowledge about a person. But it's not what Jesus is saying at all. When Jesus says, hey, I know my sheep and my sheep know me, there's two very specific components that gets attached to know. First one is trust. Because I trust my sheep, and my sheep trust me. I mean, trust is the foundation of every relationship. If you can't trust someone, what is there? If you can't trust a person, the relationship starts to crumble quickly. But the second component, the second part, is intimacy. I remember as a junior high student, middle school, my dad and mom would teach a parenting class. And he would talk about intimacy between husband and wife. And I don't know if he made this up or if he got this from someone else, but I remember him talking about intimacy. And he'd break it down this way. Into me see. And it's always stuck with me. The intimacy is all about, do you really see me? Intimacy is about you being willing to be open and vulnerable, to allow people to really see who you are, to really see what's going on within you, to really see your insecurities and your fears and your concerns, to really allow them into you see. And Jesus says, hey, the relationship I desire to have with my sheep and for my sheep to have with me is not a surface level relationship. It's not one of those relationships where you know a first name and a birth date and where they grew up and some fun facts that you can read on a Wikipedia page. What Jesus is saying is like, no. I know them. We have a trust relationship and we have an intimate relationship. Into me see. But Jesus doesn't stop there. He goes, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. Think about that. Jesus is saying, hey, this is the type of relationship I have with God the Father. We have this trusting, intimate relationship. And just like that relationship I have with God the Father, I desire to have with you. And Jesus wants to have that type of relationship with you, to know you and for you to know Him. And I lay down my life for the sheep. That's why He's a good shepherd. He's different than every other shepherd because He cares about the one. He cares about you by name. He's willing to give it all. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. And that statement might feel like it's kind of like off in left field because all of a sudden he's like this powerful, like, hey, I want to know you. And then he's like, oh, by the way, there's other sheep. They're not in this sheep pen. And you have to pause there and go, well, but Jesus, what do you mean? Because in all reality, this is such a powerful statement. You see, for the Jewish people, they just believed the Messiah was going to come back for them, the Jewish people. They thought the whole Old Testament, their Bible, the ancient collection of Jewish writings, they just thought it was all about them. But Jesus And God had such a vastly different plan. When you start looking at the covenant relationships through Abraham and Moses and to David, like I said, it all points to Jesus. So when Jesus says, hey, yeah, I get there's this one sheep pen, and he was referring to the Jewish people. I get that. But there's other sheep. That was everyone else. Jesus kept on pointing people, trying to lift their head to say, hey, I came for everyone. Every single person. I mean, there's something within all of us that we want to go, well, just internal. There's something within all of us where we're a little bit selfish or a lot selfish or a lot me-centric or a little me-centric. You can put the percentage on it, but we all do. And Jesus over and over again said, no, I came for everyone. For who? Everyone. For that person? Yep, for that person. And all of a sudden he drops, he goes, hey, there's other sheep. And guess what? Those other sheep, I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice. And there'll be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life. Now, it'd be easy to hear those words and just think that there's this causal relationship between God the Father and God the Son. But it's not what Jesus is saying. What Jesus is saying, remember, this all gets connected back to that word know, trust, intimacy, the relationship that Jesus has with God the Father and what Jesus desires to have with you and with me. A relationship to know, to trust, into me see. And so when he says the reason the Father loves me is that I lay down my life, what he's saying is my life is in obedience of God. I'm choosing to follow God. Jesus is saying, hey, my life, because I trust God the Father and our relationship is intimate, I'm going to choose to obey whatever he asks me to do. I'm going to choose to do whatever he asks me to do. Because that's what love looks like. Because I'm going to choose to lay down my life. But that's not the end of the story. But I'm only going to take it up again. Death's not going to hold me down. Jesus goes on, he goes, no one takes it from me. But I lay it down of my own accord. I choose to lay it down. An authority. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This command I received from the Father. You see, he's a good shepherd that knows his sheep. And he desires for his sheep to know him. He's a good shepherd that chose to give his life for his sheep. You see, it's a powerful image that Jesus paints for you, for me. This image of him choosing to lay down his life in obedience to God the Father, because he trusted God and his intimate relationship with God the Father. He understood what God was doing over the course of time for all people, not just for the Jewish people, but for everyone. But even in the act of laying his life down, choosing to die, death was not going to hold him down. At TCC, maybe you've heard this phrase before. It's brand new. Now, I'll get into in a moment why we call it brand new, but it's a time where we celebrate people taking a step, in baptism. Now, the step of of obedience, a step of faith, a step of baptism, what I understand, what I get is that depending on what denomination you were raised in, what type of church framework you were raised in, there's a lot of different insights around that. And maybe you're just a little bit confused, or maybe you're wondering, why we do what we do, or why your church did what they did. And there's no way I could answer every one of your questions. But usually when it comes to baptism, there's a how question and a when question. And I wanted just to kind of highlight those because, again, baptism is such this powerful, powerful insight into, actually what Jesus just taught about him being the good shepherd. On the how side, how do we baptize? I just always encourage people to go back to the Bible. What does the Bible say? Because when you start reading about, how the Bible talks about baptism, how it's taught, it starts to paint a pretty powerful picture. And in fact, it's why we do what we do. You see, the word baptism or baptize is actually a Greek word. The Greek word is baptizo. It's called a transliteration. They didn't have an English word for it, so they literally took letter by letter. And you could see it, just the B and the B and the A, right? They just kind of made up a new English word that we now will use, baptism. But the Greek word is baptizo. And baptizo means to dunk, to wash, and to submerge. They would use baptizo to describe a ship that's sinking in the ocean, right? Maybe it hit a rock, or maybe a fierce storm, and all of a sudden that ship baptizoed. There's a poet that wrote a recipe for making pickles. And in that recipe, they use the word baptizo for taking, cucumbers and submerging them, dunking them in the solution to make pickles. They baptizoed pickles. You see, this idea was to take a person and baptizo them, to dunk them underneath water and to bring them up again. That's the how. And that's why we will submerge, dunk people in water, because it's the image of this word, what baptizo means, which gets to the when. Like, when should you get baptized? Well, when you see baptism in the New Testament, it was after someone repented or placed their faith or trust in Jesus. That next step was to say, where's water? I need to get baptized. We simply say it this way, that baptism is the outward celebration of the inward transformation. That when you place your faith, your trust in Jesus, right, he changes you from the inside out. Now the outward celebration is baptism. That's why we will celebrate and we scream and we clap and we play music when people get baptized, because it is a celebration of what Jesus has done within a person. Baptism doesn't save you. Again, it's a celebration. It's the outward sign of what's going on within. And you might be thinking to yourself, Chris, when I was an infant, I got sprinkled, right? And those two statements get into the how and the when. And what I want you to hear from me is, that's not a bad thing. Your parents, your grandparents, maybe an aunt and uncle, they loved you and they wanted to have an incredible special moment for you. So it's not good or bad. But what I would encourage you is this. There was a point that you place your faith, your trust in Jesus. And if you've done that and haven't been baptized, dunked, submerged like a pickle, I would encourage you to take that step. It doesn't discount what happened as a child, as an infant. But there's something about baptism, because it is the symbol of your old self going underneath the water, being buried, dying to self. And when you come out of the water, you're brand new. You see, that phrase, brand new, gets anchored to something that the Apostle Paul wrote to a church in the ancient city of Corinth. It's in 2 Corinthians, and he writes this. Wrong side. He writes these words. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, the new creation has come. The old is gone, the new is here. And that's the image of baptism. Your old self going underneath the water. When you come up out of the water, you're a new creation, not because of anything you've done, but what Jesus has done within you and through you. You need to take that step of obedience in baptism. It's a celebration of what Jesus did. His death, his burial, and God raised him from the grave. Now, maybe you have more questions about baptism. Or maybe you're ready to get baptized. Either way, we just made it real simple. You can go to tcconline.tv/top3. In fact, at our physical locations, most all of our physical locations will have this QR code right in front of them. You can just scan that on your phone, click on baptism, and there you can sign up for baptism. And we have a digital group coming up. So if you have some questions that you just want to ask, I promise you, if you have a question, there's other people that are going to be on that digital group that have the same question. There's no stupid question at all. We want to help partner with you to take that step of baptism. Parents, maybe your child has been asking some questions. I think this is an amazing journey for you as a parent to walk with your child. But remember, baptism comes after you place your faith, your trust in Jesus. Last week across all of our churches, we had a moment to invite people to place their faith and trust in Jesus. And we had hands go up all over our churches. I mean, it is something that we celebrate. Why? Because Jesus came so that you could experience life to the full. But it starts with him, and it ends with him. It's all about Jesus. If you've made that step, you place your faith in Jesus, I just want to encourage you. Take that next step. Get baptized. Allow us as a church to celebrate with you. Jesus said he was a bread to come. Place your faith, your belief in him. He's a light. He calls us to follow him. He's a gate. We are to listen to his voice. And he's the shepherd. And he desires for us to know him. How do you know him? Well, it starts with placing your belief in him. How do you know him? It's following him. In step, right behind him. Allowing him to illuminate the darkness around him. How do you know him? You've got to listen to his voice. And how do you know him? Well, that's where we're going in part 5 of Beyond. Let me pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I'm thankful that your son Jesus is a good shepherd. And he desires to have a relationship built on trust and intimacy. Not some surface level relationship, but a relationship where we get to know who he really is, and we allow him to see who we really are. To have a relationship with him that's raw, authentic, vulnerable, built on trust and intimacy. Heavenly Father, I'm overwhelmed to know that he chose to lay down his life for everyone, for all who call to him, place their faith, their trust in him. In your name I pray.